The Permian Basin continues to grow. More jobs, more profits, more production, and more water. Millions of barrels of extremely salty, unusable water are generated in the Permian Basin every day. Most of it is disposed of below surface, out of sight, out of mind, until it isn't. West Texas endures the worst of the issue: overwhelming waste, earthquakes, unknown subsurface issues, and growing groundwater contamination concerns. It's the produced water problem.
If this was happening in Houston, Texas, and River Oaks or Tanglewood, the problem would have already been solved.
We can't keep making that money in oil and gas unless we figure out what to do with the water.
If we do not get a hold of it now and get on top of it now, it will be absolute ecological disaster.
I think produced water management, treatment, and reuse is likely the greatest challenge in the industry today.
So what is produced water?
It's water that already exists in the formation deep down in the earth that comes up with the produced hydrocarbons as part of the exploration operations. And in our estimation, we've got 10 to 14 million barrels a day of produced water that need to be managed.
About 3 million barrels per day are reused by the oil and gas industry. But even if the industry used every drop possible, an enormous amount of waste remains. Most of it originates in the Permian Basin. Hydraulic fracturing led to the rise in produced water volumes.
In order to remove all of the hydrocarbons from tight shale in several plays, especially in the Permian Basin, we're actually going so far below and capturing so much product. There's a significant amount of other products inside of the shale, including produced water. And so the volumes are new, but the production of water is not.
Production has changed significantly over time.
In the mid-late 1800s and early 1900s, the kind of wells that our grandparents drilled were just vertical wells into rocks with high porosity and permeability.
That means the oil was extracted more easily with conventional means. It came from geological layers like porous sandstone and flowed without as much man-made effort.
But then we ran out of those kinds of rocks. So we went to the shales and started creating our own fractures to improve the flow.
Horizontal wells grew in popularity in the 1970s and took off in the 1990s after reservoirs easily accessed by vertical wells depleted. Today, much of production comes from shale, which has tight pores.
There's tons of little interbedded sands and shells. When we create these hydraulic fractures, we're intersecting these layers.
Produced water is about 3 times saltier than ocean water.
There's really no practical industrial uses. You know, it's too salty for a farmer to use. You wouldn't want to give it to an animal, as an example, because of the salt levels. So it's a challenge for us to be able to economically treat that to make it affordable for all these other applications.
It may also include hydrocarbons, chemicals used in production, and substances scientists are still identifying. Deemed useless, the produced water is injected into saltwater disposal wells, or SWDs.
They're kind of permanent trash cans, if you will. We tried to find isolated deep formations where that water would, never need to come up from there.
But it isn't that simple.
Most of our knowledge of underground formations comes from our mapping, trying to find oil and gas. In some of these new deeper formations that we're injecting into, they're actually quite a bit deeper than the historic oil and gas formations. So we really didn't have the opportunity to characterize them that well. We're finding they can be very receptive, deep injection locations, but we're also seeing complicating factors like earthquakes that may be related to that.
In 2022, Texas had the most earthquakes in the lower 48, and far west Texas bears the most significant burden. Earthquakes have continued to increase since 2009, with a major uptick in recent years.
Our analysis of the seismicity in the state shows that all those earthquakes, most of them are related to oil and gas operations. Part of it is due to hydraulic stimulation, but most of it seems to be likely connected with injection of produced water.
Founded in 2017, TexNet has rapidly grown to monitor earthquakes across the state. Fracking-related earthquakes happen nearby within hours or days. The fix? A pause in operations. Disposal-related earthquakes are another story. They happen long after injection and far from the site.
So we cannot turn off the seismicity, actually, as soon as we identify that the injection is the causal factor.
This brought injection restrictions from the Railroad Commission, which regulates oil and gas. They're called seismic response areas, or SRAs. 3 SRAs are active in Gardendale, North Culberson Reeves, and Stanton after each area experienced a magnitude 4 or 5 earthquake. And while there are differing theories on what causes the earthquakes, each Railroad Commission response blames deep injection.
Well, the irony in this is the reason we went to deep was because we thought we needed to get away from shallow to begin with. And now we're kind of going back to that same area we were trying to avoid.
Shallow disposal wells are typically above 5,000 feet, while deep disposal goes about 8 to 10,000 feet below surface. Those depths vary in each basin, and there are many unknowns about those deeper zones.
The bad news is that we really don't know what's going on deep underground. We don't know if the water is staying isolated in that formation, or perhaps it's kind of slipping out, maybe even falling deeper with gravity. I am more concerned about the shallow landscape, and the reason is there's just more conflicts going on there.
The oil and gas industry's oldest infrastructure is at shallow depths. Amid high pressures from injection, Capper says abandoned, improperly plugged, and/or undocumented wells can become leaky pathways for produced water. That creates the potential for pollution of soil and water, a growing concern for West Texas landowners. Earthquakes, disposal, leaky wells, pressures, they're all becoming part of the same conversation. It isn't just an oil and gas industry problem. Every Texan has a stake in the matter, some more directly than others.
I was born here in Odessa. My great-granddad came out here to Ector County in 1883. When I was born, my dad, he gave each of us kids a heifer calf, and that's how we got started ranching.
A fourth-generation rancher, Skylar White has closely watched his land evolve. His Pecos County land hosts cattle, mesquite, and 250 orphaned oil and gas wells. Currently, 15 are leaking to surface.
My dad told me a long time ago, if you got a problem with the company, go to the boss. Go talk to the boss. I'm the boss of this ranch, so I'm going to go down there to Austin and talk to the boss.
Each month, White speaks publicly to the Railroad Commission, which regulates oil and gas.
You'll state your name, who you're here for the record.
Morning. My name is Skylar White from Goldsmith. I'm here representing myself. There's a lot of people in this room being paid to be here, and I'm not one of them. I'm not the smartest guy. I'm not the most well-spoken guy. I'm just a guy that just keeps showing up.
Yet, he's become the poster child for what he says is a group that is unlikely to step into the public eye in the first place: ranchers.
There's a lot of misconceptions about us and about what we do, and we're not very good at telling our story.
Pecos, Crane, Ward, and beyond, ranchers deal with the consequences of leaking wells. And as shallow injection of produced water has increased,
we're beginning to see weaknesses in some of these old wells. You probably heard about orphan wells or plugged and abandoned wells, really improperly plugged and abandoned wells.
Texas hosts around 7,000 orphaned wells, a multi-million-dollar state burden. They're wells owned by delinquent operators that have been inactive for over a year. Initially, wells are cased and cemented to keep them isolated from subsurface layers. A leaking well means that infrastructure has corroded.
So these wells can become a conduit for leaks or pollution or contamination.
That's a recipe for groundwater concerns. First, tests have to prove contamination exists, and if it does, proving fault is costly and time-consuming. For some, that's not a deterrent.
Okay, I'm gonna dig up every well, and then we're gonna see, you know?
Every well on Antino Ranch will be excavated this year.
We have cadaver farms all over the United States that help forensic scientists when they find a body in a murder investigation. Nobody's ever excavated a plug and abandoned well to check its condition, and I like to think that's what we're doing out here. You know, we've got a 22,000 acre cadaver farm.
Managed by vocal Railroad Commission critic Sarah Stogner, Antino Ranch is another fixture in the leaky well world. The project is part of a case against several oil and gas companies for a blowout and leaky well damages. It's what kept Hawk Dunlap in West Texas.
I've traveled and worked in over 100 countries throughout the world, and this subsurface crossflow out here that we're dealing with out here is the worst I've ever seen.
He's now found manning the excavator.
You know, there's the wet patches on the ground, there's anomalies the way the wells were left when they were abandoned. In order to do a deep dive, we really needed to move some dirt.
They're checking all 330 wells for liquid or gas leaks. With more than 100 uncovered, they say a majority have some cause for concern. Antina Ranch and Stogner are synonymous with the orphan well issue. For her, the big picture grows more dire with each discovery.
I wish I was hyperbolic. And it's probably even worse than I understand and know. And so, I don't know, I just feel like I can't sleep at night. I dream about this.
But it's not only familiar faces wanting solutions. Water quality is also top of mind for Bill White, the rancher who faced the late 2023 crane blowout. As crews descended on the land he had spent his life savings on, he was shut out of the process.
I don't begrudge them that they don't tell me anything, but on the other hand I do, because I really want to know what's going on. It's my land and it's my water, and that's potentially getting polluted, and I didn't have anything to do with causing this mess, and I don't know how, I don't know what it's going to take to fix it.
It came from an undocumented well that spent weeks out of control and cost the Railroad Commission $2.5 million. The state of his groundwater is unclear. A sample from the initial brine water flow had benzene levels 10 times the federal and state drinking water limit. It's a hydrocarbon and carcinogen. At this time, it's unknown what effect the significant volumes of water will have on white soil and groundwater. The Railroad Commission said they detected no hydrocarbons in the initial water and no groundwater contamination. Water protection has been cited as the Railroad Commission's top priority. White's blowout happened about a mile from the last major blowout, so neighbors wonder who will be next.
If something like what's happening in Crane east of Grand Falls happened, our place would be unlivable.
Briggs and his wife face 5 leaky wells on their property.
When you have an orphaned well, there's no pumper coming out every day. Nobody checks these wells at all. So it's my responsibility as a landowner to go around and check on them. I think that the wells have started making enough trouble that we have to stand up now.
Those stances often rear their head as a pro or anti-oil and gas argument, alienating one side or the other.
We're not anti-oil and gas, but at the same time, we want to live here.
Like Briggs, none of these ranchers identify as anti-oil and gas, but they do expect more. Characterizing themselves as residents of drive-through country, they're the ones watching their land die when a leak hits.
The nasty stuff, and this stuff just poisons everything. It poisons the soil and the water, and nothing will grow here.
Watching old infrastructure fail leaves them with one conclusion: their water is in danger. They're asking for more accountability from operators, proactive orphan well plugging, and answers about what's happening underground.
I don't know, I guess the story is that you just have to get up every day and keep going. And over time, maybe I'll make some change, maybe not. But I'm going to keep going, because I think there's a lot of them out there sitting on the sidelines just kind of waiting on me and Sarah and Hawk and everybody else to make some headway. I think all of my neighbors are going to be in this fight before it's over with.
But actually the thing that sold me on Midland, Texas was the fact that they offered me a job in 1982, and there wasn't many of us during that time frame that were even being offered jobs.
Scott Dufford arrived in Midland as a young geologist and a candidate for a job at Marathon. He remembers the downtown was empty. He's been here ever since, working in the oil and gas industry, serving on city council, and watching Midland grow. The region has brought 100 plus years of waxing and waning production. Many areas like Midland and Odessa have seen major growth.
Yeah, a large portion of our economy is associated with oil and gas assets. So to say that they're not important, that would be a mistake. Regardless of who you are, it touches you in some way.
All of that progress comes with a price.
And groundwater is historically under-considered, undervalued, substantially undervalued. The only time you know how important water is when you're really thirsty.
And drinking water has often taken a back seat.
There's always a disconnect between seeking the ability to make profit and then seeking to protect something that's valuable itself, groundwater. We can't live out here unless we have something to drink. You can't grow anything out here unless you have good, clean water.
Groundwater is just that. It's water that once fell from the sky that fills pore spaces in underground rocks. The Railroad Commission provides groundwater guidelines that vary depending on operations. Class 1 and 2 groundwater must be protected by all operators. That's drinkable or potentially drinkable water, like the locally significant Pecos Valley and Ogallala aquifers. Some operations have stricter requirements, and they must protect Class 3 groundwater, which is brackish. Those requirements make up general guidelines for the base of usable quality water. Its depths vary throughout the Permian Basin, but it has to be protected with extra barriers.
Generally what they call set behind pipe. You want to put surface casing down through those intervals and circulate cement on them.
But these weren't always the standards.
In the early days. The construction was, they just didn't know, right? You say, well, it was subpar. It was par for the time. The only reason why they would run casing is if they couldn't keep the hole open.
As the person who brings solutions to industry problems, Straub says it's always important to ask questions about groundwater safety.
We've dealt with wells that have come to surface, aging infrastructure that has failed, and we've dealt with off-site wells, legacy wells that are near injectors that become conduits for failure. And sometimes that can be pretty egregious.
Every situation is different. The manner of pollution, soil type, the pollutant itself. A major spill may not contaminate groundwater. A minor leak over time may. No matter the situation, you have to see it to fix it.
There's threats you see that are addressable, and there's threats you don't see that you only find them after it's too late.
In the Permian Basin, there are unknown unknowns.
There's a significant catalog of historic wells that exist that we have no record of.
Ultimately, there's no complete picture of the subsurface. For a rancher looking for answers, that's unacceptable.
It doesn't make any sense to me that we could have all these geologists in the area and we have all this knowledge from seismic work and well logs and everybody's, well, I don't know what's causing that. I don't know where that pressure's coming from. We need to know that.
In most explanations, there is one constant. Blame falls on past operators. Some say they knew better. Others say they don't benefit from today's knowledge. Nonetheless, they made a grave mistake.
The failure is planning for the end-of-life sequence. That means not necessarily the initial install, but it's the end of life now that we're dealing with, that I think most organizations failed to plan for.
And legacy wells are scattered throughout Texas. Their owners may be unknown or bankrupt.
Well, that's where you run into the gray, is who's supposed to pay for this? Who's liable? And I don't know how you answer that question. I'm a groundwater guy, I'm not an attorney.
Currently, the Railroad Commission is paying for many plug jobs through state and national funding, but the burden is significant. In 2022, the Commission spent more than $48 million from state funds on cleanup efforts.
We're keep identifying and trying to treat the symptoms of the cancer without actually dealing with the cancer itself. To locate and find all of these wells and confirm the fact they're plugged is going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars.
Before his recent foray into politics, Birch spent his time as an oil well firefighter and engineer. Birch believes checking on every well and immense groundwater monitoring will be the only total solution. So figuring out if that enormous cost falls on operators or taxpayers will be necessary.
And nobody wants to look at a capital cost of having to re-enter all these wells. The reality is that this is going to have to happen in the future.
Railroad Commission staff declined an interview but answered some questions via email. The Commission said it has strict plugging requirements, adding that they have little evidence of widespread previously plugged wells failing. They said saltwater injection operators are required to plug abandoned wells within a quarter mile of the permit site. A representative of many oil and gas operators, PBPA's Lozano, says it's in no one's best interest for wells to leak or earthquakes to occur.
I think everyone should be concerned about environmental issues. I don't think this is a challenge or something unique to only a certain group. It's not an area that's owned only by environmentalists or oil and gas operators. I think at the end of the day, all of us want to be good stewards of land and resources that exist.
The industry is set on solutions in handling legacy issues. They're vital to the success of the industry.
If there are not frameworks in place in law, if there are not processes in place for industry, we need to develop those. One of the most important things I think we do as a trade association representing all of industry is coming up with ideas that are consistent consistent, that are protective of human health and safety. Yes, it's a lot of work and it takes a lot of time, but it's for the benefit of the communities that we operate in. And it encourages long-term development when we maintain this trust.
One solution has gained significant traction and funding, keeping produced water from injection in the first place. Beneficial reuse is viewed as a great opportunity. It's even considered a potential solution to solve state water shortages.
I think this is a time that should bring excitement. The reason why there's such a robust interest in the water midstream sector is because of this excitement. There is capital, there's interest, and certainly a need.
Tucked inside a building in rural Midland, native West Texas plants and alfalfa are the star subjects of a produced water experiment. It's one of many projects set on answering one question: can this extremely salty water find uses outside of the oil and gas industry?
So the way that the greenhouse is laid out is we took soil from our Reeves County land, and then the second row we took soil from our Loving County land. And in
the greenhouse is the tail end of a 5-step process that illustrates the complexities of produced water treatment. It starts with a truckload of produced water dumped into tanks. The water is disinfected and clarified, but it remains an extremely hard water.
That water has a very high TDS in comparison to most water. So that water comes back anywhere from the lower side 65,000 to the upper range of 130,000. And so what that means is in parts per million, there are 120,000 parts per million of total dissolved solids in that water.
TDS can include an array of solids. Produced water carries a lot of salt, but could also contain solids like calcium and magnesium, and even unknown substances. The federal drinking water recommendation caps total dissolved solids at 500 parts per million. Ocean water, on average, has 35,000 parts per million TDS. Produced water arriving at Texas Pacific Water Resources is sometimes over 120,000 parts per million TDS.
The easiest way to monitor the desalination is just by looking solely at the TDS as a whole.
The water is desalinated by 50% at a time. It's an energy-saving measure and an overall costly procedure.
So if we're starting at 100,000 TDS, the first processing step is going to get us to, 45 to 50,000. And then once we desalinate the 45 to 50,000 and we reduce that by half, then it's ready for reverse osmosis.
That's a common filtering technique referred to as RO.
From this tank, it goes to RO outside. It comes inside through these different piping systems, and it comes in at 3 different salinities.
The plants are watered with treated produced water at 500, 1,000, and 1,500 parts per million TDS, along with filtered groundwater as a control. After 6 months, the staff has not noticed major differences in plant growth.
The alfalfa, even without fertilizer and pesticides, responded very well to the treated produced water. The native plants were not really affected by it at all, except for the fact that the native plants out here don't normally have that much water availability.
Appearances don't paint the full picture.
But the true data is going to be in the roots of the plants and the tissue of the plants. That's what we're going to see, and the soil too.
Throughout, staff also performed water analysis, touching on a question looming over the whole topic. What exactly is in the water? It's a question considered by many innovators right now, and it's part of produced water's transformation from trash to treasure. The state of Texas launched its own investigation in 2021 and created the Texas Produced Water Consortium.
The question of produced water is a microcosm of the much larger question of our state. Are we going to have adequate water resources for the future generations?
According to the 2022 State Water Plan's 50-year projection, no.
By 2070, we're looking at 7 million acre feet short of water. We've got a need in the state of 7 million acre feet.
Imagine 7 million football fields covered in 1 foot of water.
We have excess volumes of produced water from their operations, so it's an opportunity that the state saw to come in and say, well, this is potentially a new source of water.
The consortium estimates as much as 511,000 acre feet of produced water could be used outside of the industry per year. Smith believes it could eventually become drinking water, but that's not the immediate goal.
We said, we need answers quick, and the fastest reuse paths to look at were going to be those non-human consumptive sides. So looking at, possibly native rangeland restoration, certain agricultural crops that are not edible.
To assess that potential, the consortium and the Railroad Commission are looking for pilot projects to observe. That will help legislators write rules about how the water can be used.
Where we're kind of at a standstill is just in the regulations. What are the correct regulations? How clean does the water have to be? How do we do this? How much water can you put on a crop? How much water can you put in a surface water? Can we inject it into an aquifer for aquifer recharge?
Plus, there may be more value to the produced water than the clean water itself.
This water is so unbelievably complex that there are unbelievable opportunities to extract value from these waters that could go into other sectors as well.
He says produced water has arguably the most complex mix of biogeochemical constituents on the planet, and every batch varies.
Biological, bacteria. Geological, you're talking metals, minerals, calcium, magnesium, sodium chloride, lithium, cobalt, and then obviously chemical, there's hydrocarbons.
He says there could be a gold rush for extracting those valuable elements, and that may create some complicated legal questions about who owns that value. But before major change, there are still significant problems to solve, like scalability and economics. Other states like New Mexico, California, Pennsylvania, and others have implemented techniques to study, clean, and reuse the water.
It's really taking that promising equipment, that leading edge equipment that's already being used in other places, and just putting it into application on our water.
To gain traction, the water treatment alternative has to have a competitive price. The consortium estimates it costs operators 60 to 70 cents per barrel to dispose produced water. Water treatment is often complicated and expensive.
We're trying to find that technology that is scalable, can treat massive quantities of water at a time, but can get us down as close as possible to that dollar per barrel range.
Plus, there are numerous professionals with this issue on their mind.
And as we all continue to do research and we all continue to truly quantify everything that's in this water, we're all going to move in that direction. And so I think it would be within a couple years that we would start seeing this being applied in the industry at a rate that is noticeable.
With funding, innovation, and initiative, the produced water problem may become the produced water opportunity.